Hi, my name is Jacek, and I'm interviewing Peter Joseph here, who has just come from the United States to Berlin to give a lecture. And first of all, I would like you just to introduce yourself and tell two sentences about who you are.
Sure. As you state, Peter Joseph, I founded the Zeitgeist movement, as it's called, which is a leaderless movement that was started in 2008, late 2008. And I basically am a social critic and a media creator. I mainly do films to communicate a socially conscious message.
Mm-hmm. And in one of the films you introduced the resource-based economy to the wider public. Now it's being termed the natural law resource-based economy.
Right.
First of all, I would like to ask you why the change? Why the natural law was added?
You could basically state that a resource-based economy is any type of economy that uses resources. And it was also a derivative of another organization started by a man named Jacques Fresco, who has a kind of a specific design reference for what he puts forward, which is less available to open source thought. A natural law resource-based economy denotes two things. It denotes the importance of natural law right in the title, which means these are laws of nature, sustainability and efficiency laws that exist around us that we have discovered that we need to harmonize with in order to be in a steady state environment, not have consumption overrun, not lose biodiversity and scarcity and all those things that are occurring today. And the other part of that is it also makes a novel concept away from the original predication of the resource-based economy, which gives a more open source definition and distinction to allow more people to contribute to it, which I think a lot of people, when they hear a resource-based economy, they instantly think of one particular version of it put forward by Fresco. This is a variation of that, not affiliated with Fresco.
So now we call it a natural law resource-based economy because it denotes, let's say, a better understanding of this. So it's not a set in stone.
I am just as singular as anyone else. I might have founded the movement, but people can call this whatever they want. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a train of thought. It's how you choose to think about this type of design approach and efficiency approach to society. And there are no 100% correct angles or directions. Mm-hmm. We have these principles, and as technology moves forward, as science moves forward, the mechanisms which will make this happen can be very, very different. So there are very many approaches to this within the bounds of those natural law rules, which are indeed static.
But now we are not in a resource-based economy of any kind. Would you say that we are in a transition, or are we still before that stage?
I would say that we're in a very destabilized period ecologically and culturally, because there's all sorts of uprisings that continue to happen because of deprivation, and people are looking for change, but most people don't really think about, or they're not aware of how a society could be managed in a technical sense to ensure sustainability, and also to think about how we pretty much need to start creating equality on some level. You know, just like we have race equality in most countries, gender equality in most countries, creed equality in most countries, we need economic equality in order to keep stability. And we can do it now because of our capacity to create a post-scarcity environment.
Just like the Wilkinson's book states that this income equality makes everything basically work better. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's, you know, I could say a great deal about materialism, about this sort of violence of acquisition or acquisitive violence, where people have been conditioned by the market economy, which thrives on consumption, because people have to buy more and more and more. They develop a value where they want more and more and more. And that's, you know, that's very unhealthy. That's almost destructive. I'd say it is destructive in many cases, because people hoard money for the sake of money. They're really hoarding resources in food, because money represents energy that can move towards production. And they take it and they hoard it for the purpose of simply having it as that form of security, whether it's $1 million or $100 billion. It doesn't really matter in the view of the market, you know. Because to say this, human needs are considered the exact same as human wants in the framework of market psychology. And that's very destructive for a stable society. You can't think that way.
But on a positive note, are there any systems or technologies that you see here right now that could resemble something that will work in a natural law resource-based economy? Of course.
I mean, all the existing technologies that are applied right now on some level represent some degree of efficiency towards a given end. So whether you're talking about energy systems, which there are many other energy systems apart from what we're using, obviously we don't want to be in a hydrocarbon economy anymore, but that doesn't necessarily mean the technology that's putting forward the hydrocarbon economy is bad. It just means that the medium isn't efficient anymore compared to the fact that we have all these renewables. So there's, we have renewable energy, for example, used in pockets throughout the world. That's great. It's just not vast enough. The consideration of making really efficient technologies, which we can do, isn't given much credence. Why? Because the market requires inefficiency at all times. Imagine for a moment if every single house had a 80% conversion for solar array, radiation conversion, and they could run into a simple battery technology and be completely off the grid. And that technology could be developed and distributed to everyone within 5 years. Imagine if that was possible, which it kind of is. You would see a dramatic collapse of the entire world energy system if that type of efficiency was put forward, especially if those solar arrays could exist for, say, 60 years without needing service. So what would the energy infrastructure do? Excuse me, what would the energy industry do? They would be out.
So what is this most important puzzle that we are still missing in order to get the whole process of transition going full speed ahead?
Awareness, all I can say, and projects, which couples in with awareness. There are numerous think tank style projects that I talk about and others have talked about. The earliest individual that spoke of these things was a man named R. Buckminster Fuller. He talked about something called the world game, which is very inspiring as a concept. And his game was, how do you look at the world as one unit? How do you share resources efficiently, to meet the needs of everyone on Earth? It's a calculation problem. It's a game. It's like a chess game. How do you do it? It's a math problem. And that's something people should think about. And if people are aware of that concept, because no one thinks that way. Everyone still thinks in terms of nations and economies that are localized. They don't look at the world in a holistic view. And I think the work of the Zeitgeist movement and other organizations are starting to force that view, force that need for a global consciousness. And with that comes the resource consciousness, comes the sustainability consciousness, and everything else that we talk about. So we need projects and education rapidly.
And you mentioned this mathematical issues, right? This is basically the subject of your today's lecture, right?
More or less. The final third, yes, there are other things that are talked about, but I'm talking about the macro algorithm of calculation and things.
Could you, in a nutshell, just say what it's how it's going to look like, what you're going to say, because I know that many people who are of this more economical disposition criticize what we say about the movement and the idea of resource-based economy, that it's unviable, that it's impossible because of the problem of calculation in economics.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's an old socialist objection, where they say if you don't have money, you don't have price, then you can never figure out what anything is valued subjectively. In other words, you take two heterogeneous things like this table and this glass. How do you decide value between the two? Well, first of all, in price, which does very well for subjective value, yes, we can arbitrarily trade things that each of us make that are very, very different by thinking of how the monetary relationship works. And with the entire economy competing, yes, it does work to a certain degree, but it's completely subjective. It has nothing to do with the actual value of the materials. It has nothing to do with the whole system awareness that basically decides how certain efficiencies apply. I'll give you an example. Certain metals have higher conductivity for energy, right, for electricity. And some are better than others, some are not. And that's a technical relationship. And that's where their value really rests in the context of electrical conduction. So if you think from a resource standpoint, we could manage society from a technical standpoint without the need for price and money. And the trick to do that, and this is a long subject, because I mean, I'm trying to nut bolt this down, this is why I'm giving a big talk on it, is you eliminate trade and you create a system of direct access to the means of production. It's just like in your home you have a computer, and that computer is attached to a paper printer. When you print a piece of paper, you are contributing to the means of production. It's a mini means of production. In some towns there are 3D printers, 3D printing centers, where you can take a 3D design with whatever material, send it to this printing company, and they will print it for you. Go and pick it up. In the future, it will be an open access type of environment where everyone can contribute to design, everyone can share design, because that's why you have progress, is sharing, not competition. And they will be able to control directly through interfaces, through CAD or computer-aided engineering, computer-aided design, and directly go straight to the means of production, which is fully automated. So there's no reason for trade at that stage. And there's all sorts of things I could list that are qualifiers for that, which I don't think pertain to this conversation.
If somebody wants to listen more about that, they'll surely go to the lecture that will be posted online.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you one more thing about this subject, because that type of efficiency without the price tag actually needs a lot of data, needs a lot of information. Can you tell me more a bit the ways it will be collected? Because there are people have issues with security, for example, right? So could you touch on this subject?
The main data, public data, really is just demand. That's really all it is. I mean, all any of us really contribute in the general consumer level is our sense of demand. And of course, we decide to buy certain things, we decide not to buy certain things, and those things we don't decide to buy will reduce in value and they will become obsolete. That's the price mechanism. Yes. But in the future, the only real values are natural resource values and efficiency values. Scarcity, the efficiency, labor complexity. So if you have a chair that's made in one molded shot, in one extrusion, versus a chair that's very complex that has to require human assembly, this molded chair requires is much more efficient in its construction for its purpose than this other complex chair, assuming they have similar properties as far as their use. Again, it's a complex subject, but it's all technically relatable. If you can put a quantitative value, a categorical quantification on anything, you can compare them. And in this type of society, as I'll talk about in this lecture, it's done based on what the use is and what the genre use is. And it's organized in that way. I hope that makes sense.
Of course. And as a kind of a finishing note, I would like to ask you two more questions. One is about the free market, but from a bit different standpoint, because we had a lot of conversation about that, how different resource-based economy is from the free market. I would like you to point out similarities, if you see any, and where we could find a bridge to maybe work with these people.
I would have to argue that the similarities are only loosely associated because the end goals are so different. Yes. So right now you have industry that is using automation, right? They're replacing humans with machines as much as they can because it's cheaper, cost efficiency. It's very advantageous. So you see this push towards automation on one side, but it's pushed back because deep down people know they have to have jobs. Even, I mean, if you don't have purchasing power, you can't buy things that are made by automated machines because you don't have a job, you know what I mean? So yes, there is a push for, say, automation, but it doesn't go far enough. So that's a slight similarity. I'm trying to think of other similarities. It's very hard and few and far between. The market is based on a predication of scarcity. And within a scarcity worldview, you can't assume high levels of efficiency or high levels of abundance. So to answer your question, I would say that's the only one I can find off the top of my head.
All right.
As far as it's very different. It's the opposite, really, of what this system does today.
All right. And I would like you to maybe think of a message that you could send right now to Polish people who have actually been through a communist regime and have this kind of negative attitude towards something we say because they're associated with these old times. So something that would maybe make them change their mind about what we advocate.
I would say that the seeds of communism were very well-meaning if you read those that were in philosophy towards it. The problem is it wasn't thought out, and there was no way to actually create the environment because of the scarcity that was inherent. The communism also existed within the larger structure of the market. So communist trade had to engage the market on an international level. They also used money in the lower echelon of it, while the means of production was controlled by an elite. And these are all, none of this could possibly work. So you don't look at communism from the standpoint as that's what a communal concept was, as though any concept where you're not trading is going to lead to that type of circumstance. I'll say this though, for those that are fearful, I would be much more fearful of what we're doing today, given the incredible loss of biodiversity, the incredible consumption overshoot we have today because of industrial inefficiency, which is leading to vast life support decline. Almost every life support system on this planet is in decline. And we have a population that's going to be 9 billion soon. I would also say that the competitive society, especially with this pressure I've just mentioned, the competitive society breeds destabilization. It breeds war. It breeds uprisings. We've had one uprising. There's probably an uprising, a couple of them happening right now. There's uprising almost every day right now. Why? Because of inequality, a lack of resources, and basic representation of inefficiency. Between these two things, the fear of dictatorship, the fear of loss of freedom, much lower on my sense of priority. And I'm not saying that anything would lead to these issues. I'm saying we need to be aware of the problem we're actually in. The market has killed more people in the past 100 years than every war and every dictator combined due to its structural violence, meaning due to the fact that because we have this means to create an abundance, we don't utilize it because of the preservation of scarcity. Therefore, all these people suffer and die just because this is the nature of the system. And yet we don't see it, it's invisible. So this system is completely open source and utterly democratic. It's a kind of participatory democracy, which was never seen in communism, where people are going to actively engage in modern technology to build the world around them, based, again, through the filter of sustainability and efficiency principles.
Thank you very much for
thank
this
you.
interview, and hopefully we'll see you in Poland someday as well.
I hope so, yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.